My name is Mara Ellison, and I was 34 when my father looked across a room full of his clients, lifted his glass, and called my job nothing. He said it with a smile, which somehow made it worse. Dad was celebrating 30 years of Ellison Commercial Fixtures, the business he had built with his hands, his temper, and a belief that anyone who did not sell, install, or negotiate in person was playing at work. My younger brother stood beside him in a new navy suit. My mother laughed too quickly, and I stood near the dessert table with a glass of water, listening to my father explain that I organized emails for a living and that Evan was the one who understood real business. They expected me to smile because I always had. They expected me to let the joke pass because my father was the host and because the room was full of people who had known him longer than they had known me. I did not argue. I put my glass down and stepped toward the window where I could finally breathe. Then his biggest client, Celeste Nguyen from Wexford Hospitality Group, crossed the room and asked whether I had a few minutes. She did not ask because she felt sorry for me. She asked because the hospital conversion project I had saved the year before had reached her board, and Wexford needed someone with my exact experience for a new capital project. Mr. Ellison tells me you work in documentation, she said, looking directly at me. That is not how I would describe what you do. We need a project controls lead who can keep a complicated renovation from collapsing under its own promises. Would you consider meeting with us tomorrow? This is a family conflict story about career humiliation, family betrayal, quiet revenge, and the day my father learned that the work he called nothing was the work his biggest client trusted most. Before I explain why I did not use that moment to hurt him, you need to understand how long I had been trained to make myself smaller whenever my father needed to be the biggest person in the room. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to speak to the person whose work is always minimized because it is quiet, careful, or difficult to explain in one sentence. You do not have to make your contribution louder for it to be real. You do not have to accept being described by the person who benefits most from not seeing you clearly. Sometimes the proof is not a speech. Sometimes it is a client, a record, a solved problem, or a door that opens because someone finally understands what you can do. If this story feels familiar, write the word "scene" in the comments. And if you enjoy calm drama, stories about family conflict, professional respect, quiet strength, and the truth that shows up in public without being forced, subscribe for more. Now, let me tell you about the family business, where I learned to carry clipboards, hold doors, answer phones, and never expect my father to say my name with pride. The first office I ever worked in was my father's back room. Ellison Commercial Fixtures sat between a tire shop and a wholesale plumbing supplier on the industrial side of Belhaven. The front showroom held sample doors, office chairs, hardware catalogs, and framed photographs of jobs Dad was proud of: hotel lobbies, corporate cafeterias, a university library, to regional hospitals. The back room held invoices, coffee that had been sitting since dawn, and a folding table where I spent Saturdays sorting packing slips by job number. My father, Thomas Ellison, called it teaching me the business. I think he meant teaching me where I fit inside it. He would hand me a stack of delivery tickets and say, "Make yourself useful, Mara." When a client came in, I was told to offer coffee. When a contractor called angry about a late shipment, I was told to take a message. When Dad and his sales manager discussed margins, I was told not to interrupt. I learned early that useful and important were not the same thing. My younger brother, Evan, was for years behind me and seemed to understand my father's language immediately. He liked walking the showroom with Dad, learning the names of materials, repeating adult jokes, and calling people by their first names before he was old enough to drive. Dad loved that. He would clap Evan on the shoulder and say, "This one has instincts." I had instincts too. Mine were just different. I noticed that invoices did not match delivery dates. I noticed that a change order had been approved in an email, but never entered in the project file. I noticed that a contractor who sounded calm on the phone had called 6 times in 2 days, which meant the issue mattered more than Dad wanted to admit. When I was 14, I created a color-coded board for open jobs on the backroom wall. I thought Dad would appreciate it. He stared at the cards for a long time, then said, "You have too much time on your hands." 2 weeks later, he used the board to call 3 installers before a missed delivery became a penalty charge. He never said thank you. My mother, Diane, noticed more than she admitted. She would whisper, "Your father is old-fashioned," when he dismissed me. Sometimes, she tried to soften his words before they reached me, but softening did not change the pattern. Dad praised me when I was invisible enough to help and criticized me whenever I wanted credit for the help. In college, I studied operations management and facilities planning. I liked how complex systems could be made understandable when someone cared enough to ask the right questions. I liked contracts because they were clearer than family promises. I liked project schedules because a missed date could not pretend it had never happened just because the loudest person in the room wanted to move on. After graduation, I took a position at Stonebridge Project Services, a small owner representative firm that helped hospitals, hotels, and municipal clients manage renovations. My title was Project Controls Coordinator. In plain language, I kept the moving parts of large construction projects connected: drawings, purchase orders, safety documents, permits, vendor schedules, commissioning reports, change orders, and the thousands of details that determined whether a building could open when everyone promised it would. Dad called it paperwork. I called it the work that kept people from discovering till late that the doors did not fit. The permits had expired, the invoices were wrong, or the equipment had been ordered from a version of the plan nobody was using anymore. At Stonebridge, I was not the loudest person in meetings. I did not need to be. I learned to ask, "Who owns this decision?" and wait through the silence. I learned to write down the answer. I learned that people respected you when you could make a difficult problem visible without making anyone feel foolish. That was why clients began asking for me by name. At home, Dad still asked whether I had found a real job yet. There were other small signs, too. Every summer, Dad let Evan ride along to supply meetings, while I stayed behind to clean the showroom. Evan came home with stories about clients, job sites, and lunches at diners where Dad talked to him like an equal. I came home with dust on my hands and a list of things that needed to be filed. When I asked to come along once, Dad said, "You would be bored." I was not bored. I was excluded. It took me years to learn the difference. The older I became, the more my father treated my job like a phase he expected me to outgrow. At holidays, he introduced Evan as my right hand at the company. He introduced me as Mara. She works with blueprints somehow. If I tried to explain project controls, he would shake his head as if I were overcomplicating something simple. "You do spreadsheets," he would say. "Evan closes deals." The truth was that Evan had joined the business after college and was good at the parts Dad valued: charm, speed, confidence, and talking to people before he had all the facts. He could sell a client a beautiful idea. What he could not always do was follow the idea through the schedule, documentation, approvals, and handover that made it safe to build. Whenever a problem appeared in the company, Dad blamed the people who made it complicated. That often meant the office manager, a subcontractor, a municipal reviewer, or anyone who asked for a form to be completed before work could continue. I watched this pattern from the edge of family dinners and company open houses. Dad did not want to admit that a business could be strong in one area and weak in another. He believed competence meant never needing the kind of structure I worked with every day. My mother helped him preserve that belief, not because she was cruel, but because she was tired. She had spent 30 years translating Dad's moods into something everyone else could live with. If he snapped, she told us he was stressed. If he interrupted, she told us he was passionate. If he minimized me, she told me he did not know how to show pride. For a long time, I accepted that explanation because I loved her. But explanation is not the same thing as repair. Evan benefited from the pattern without always understanding it. He would tell me, "Dad just wants us to push each other." Then he would ask it review a client SE's copy of work. Because you're better at details. He asked me to look at schedules, vendor logs, insurance certificates, and purchase order language. He asked when something had already started to go wrong. I helped because I did not want his failure to become another family emergency. My father never knew how many times I helped. Or maybe he knew and decided it did not count because I did not do it with a hard hat on. One autumn, Evan sent me a draft proposal for a hotel renovation and asked whether I saw anything obviously weird. I spent 4 hours reviewing it after work. The proposal used an outdated finish schedule, left out a requirement for accessibility hardware, and promised a completion date that did not include a required lead time for custom millwork. I marked every issue and sent it back. The next week, Dad called to say Evan had landed the project. He has a gift, Dad said. You should have seen him in that room. I asked whether Evan had used the revised proposal. Dad paused. He handles the business side. Don't get territorial about things that aren't yours. That sentence stayed with me because it named the rule I had been living under. I could protect the work, but I could not claim any part of it. The hotel project went smoothly enough because Evan followed the notes I had given him. Dad praised him at Christmas. My mother smiled across the table as if everyone had received the same kind of love. I smiled too. I had become very good at smiling when no one was looking closely. At one point, I began saving copies of the questions Evan asked me, not to expose him, but because I wanted to understand why Dad's version of the business and the actual business felt so far apart. The questions were always about the unglamorous parts, what a client could reasonably expect, whether a schedule was possible, why a contract required a clause, how a missing certificate could delay a shipment. The answers were not exciting. They were simply necessary. And every time I gave one, the business moved forward without anyone needing to say where it came from. The first time I remember my father making me feel small in public, I was 16. Our high school had a career night in the gymnasium, and my father agreed to speak on a panel about owning a business. I had spent weeks making a display for the operations club. It was not glamorous. I had created a simple model showing how a delayed delivery could affect construction, payroll, and client satisfaction. I was proud of it because I had taught myself how to make a complicated chain visible. Dad arrived late, wearing his work jacket and carrying a cup of coffee. He walked past my table without seeing the display at first. Then one of his friends pointed it out. Your daughter made that, the man asked. Dad looked at the cardboard arrows and color-coded schedule, then laughed. Mara likes to make projects look harder than they are, he said. Give her a few years. She learned the real work happens on the job site, The man meant no harm when he laughed with him. Neither did the two students standing near my table. But I felt heat rise into my face. I wanted to tell Dad that the job site was only one part of the work. I wanted to tell him that the people on the job site deserved plans that made sense before they arrived. Instead, I folded the display into its board and carried it home after the event. My mother found it in the hallway and asked why I had not left it at school. I told her I was tired. She touched my shoulder and said, "He did not mean it the way it sounded." For years, I thought that sentence was supposed to make me feel better. It did not. In college, Dad rarely asked about my classes. When I told him I had received an internship at a facilities consulting company, he said, "At least you'll learn how businesses actually work." When I earned a certification in project management, he asked whether it came with a real raise or just another line for LinkedIn. When I was promoted at Stonebridge, he said, "Good, maybe they will let you supervise some spreadsheets now." The comments were never loud enough to become a fight. That was part of what made them so effective. They were little cuts disguised as jokes. Each one made me question whether I was too sensitive. Each one trained me to keep good news to myself. Then, when I was 29, I helped prevent a serious opening delay at a small outpatient clinic. A mechanical subcontractor had installed equipment based on an obsolete drawing set. No one had connected the revision log to the commissioning schedule. I noticed the mismatch during a weekly review, stopped the handover, and helped the team trace the change through every document. The clinic opened 5 days later than planned instead of months later, and the client sent Stonebridge a handwritten note thanking me for seeing the issue before it became a crisis. I kept the note in a desk drawer. At Sunday dinner, Mom asked how work was going. I told them about the clinic in a cautious way, hoping perhaps my father would see why I cared about my job. Dad cut his chicken and said, "So you delayed an opening because a contractor was working." I explained that I had prevented a much longer delay. He shrugged. "That is the problem with office people. You see, form missing and think the whole world has stopped." Evan laughed because he did not know what else to do. I did not cry. I cleared the plates. I packed leftovers into containers. I drove home with the client's note in my bag and realized that my father would never believe in the value of my work just because I wanted him to. That was the beginning of a harder, healthier question. What would happen if I stopped asking him to see me? 2 years later, Stonebridge was hired to help Wexford Hospitality Group convert an aging waterfront hotel into a long-stay medical lodging facility. The project was complicated from the beginning. The building had to remain partially open. The owner wanted to serve families traveling for treatment. The city required upgraded accessibility routes, new fire safety documentation, and a phased occupancy plan that kept guests out of active construction areas. Wexford hired several firms. My father's company was one of the millwork vendors under consideration, though his bid was ultimately not selected for that phase. At the time, I did not think much about it. I was not involved in choosing vendors, and Stonebridge had a policy that required us to disclose family relationships before working with any related company. That disclosure was one reason Dad disliked my job. Act like we're criminals, because last he told me once. "No," I said. "It is a conflict disclosure. It protects everyone." He rolled his eyes as if transparency were an insult. My role at Wexford was to maintain the project controls register. That meant I tracked revision dates, approvals, owner decisions, vendor submittals, change orders and readiness requirements. Most people only noticed the register when something was missing. I noticed it every day. In the third month, I found a pattern in the room turnover files. The schedule said 14 rooms were ready for occupancy. The commissioning checklist said 12. The furniture delivery log said 16. None of the numbers matched. The differences were not dramatic enough for anyone else to call an emergency. But they were exactly the kind of differences that became expensive when the final opening date approached. I asked questions. I did not accuse anyone. I asked the contractor to show me the latest room sequence. I asked the hotel operations team to confirm which rooms had been cleared. I asked the furniture vendor to identify which deliveries were installed, staged, or still at the warehouse. 3 days later, we discovered that 2 room types had been built using an earlier furniture plan. The fix required coordination, not panic, but it had to start immediately. Celeste Nguyen, Wexford Cattle Projects, attended the meeting where I presented the issue. She did not praise me in front of everyone. She simply asked, "What do you need to prevent this from happening again?" I showed her a revised controls dashboard, a weekly owner-side checkpoint, and a sign-off process that made it impossible for a room to be called ready based on one report alone. She approved it. The project opened on time. Afterward, Celeste sent my supervisor an email that I was copied on. She wrote that I had brought clarity without chaos to a project that could easily have become adversarial. She asked that I be considered for any future Wexford work that required project controls, vendor coordination, or operational readiness. I printed the email, not because I needed proof that I had done something right, but because I had spent too long allowing the wrong people to define what my work meant. I did not show it to Dad. I had learned that offering evidence to someone determined not to see you is just another way of asking for permission. I kept working. I kept learning. And somewhere inside Wexford, a client I barely knew remembered my name. After Wexford opened the waterfront conversion, one of the operations managers told me something I never forgot. "Most teams are good at building a plan," she said. "You are good at noticing the moment the plan stops matching reality." At home, I wrote the sentence on a sticky note and placed it inside a notebook. I did not show my father. I had begun to understand that praise from someone who had seen the work was not less valuable because it came from outside my family. The event where everything changed was supposed to be my father's night. Ellison Commercial Fixtures had turned 30, and my mother planned a client appreciation dinner at the Belhaven Harbour Club. There were linen tablecloths, a photographer, a small jazz trio, and framed displays of Dad's favorite projects. Evan organized the guest list. He had invited Wexford Hospitality because their waterfront portfolio had expanded, and Dad hoped to compete for a new boutique hotel renovation called Harbour House. I almost did not go. The week before the dinner, I had been working late on a municipal library project. I was tired, and I knew exactly how the evening would unfold. Dad would tell stories about hard negotiations. Evan would circulate with a drink in one hand and a business card in the other. Mom would ask me to take photos because I was good at noticing details. Someone would ask what I did, and Dad would give them a smaller version of the answer before I could speak. But Mom called me the morning of the dinner. "Please come," she said. "It matters to your father." The sentence was familiar. It meant that I should make room for a feeling no one had ever asked Dad to make room for in me. I wore a simple black dress and arrived early enough to help Mom check place cards. Evan was already there, wearing the suit Dad had bought him for a recent sales conference. He hugged me and said, "Try to relax tonight. Dad is in a good mood." I looked around the room at the oversized company logo, the client displays, The photographs of Dad shaking hands with mayors and contractors. "I am always relaxed," I said. He smiled without hearing what I meant. Celeste arrived just before the speeches. I recognized her immediately from Wexford meetings, though we had not worked together since the waterfront project. She greeted Dad first. He was thrilled. She greeted Evan next. He introduced himself as Director of Business Development, a title Dad had recently given him despite the fact that Evan still called me whenever he needed help interpreting a contract. Then Celeste saw me across the room. Her face changed in a way I could not read at first. Not shock, recognition. "Mara Ellison," she said. Before I could answer, Dad placed a hand on Evan's shoulder and said, "That is my daughter. She works in an office somewhere. We keep her away from the real work." Celeste looked at Dad. Then she looked back at me. I felt the room narrow. Dad laughed, and the people near him laughed because they thought laughter was the safe thing to do. I had heard variations of that joke for 20 years. But this Jimmy, the person listening, knew enough to understand exactly how wrong it was. Celeste did not laugh. She said, "Mara was the reason our waterfront conversion opened on time." Dad's hand fell from Evan's shoulder. Then Celeste asked whether I could stay after the speech, because Wexford had a problem at Harbour House, and she wanted to talk to me about leading the owner-side controls team. That was the moment Dad's biggest client asked for me, and it was only the beginning. Dad's speech started 15 minutes later. I wish I could say he changed his tone after Celeste recognized me. He did not. If anything, he seemed more determined to reclaim the room. He talked about taking risks, trusting instinct, and building a company without hiding behind reports. He praised Evan for bringing new energy to the business. He thanked his employees for handling the little details so leadership could focus on what mattered. Then he saw me near the window and lifted his glass in my direction. "And thank you to my daughter, Mara," he said. "She reminds us that every company needs somebody to chase paper. Not everyone can be out there making things happen." There was a polite ripple of laughter. My mother's eyes closed for half a second. Evan stared at his drink. I felt the old instinct rise. Smile, make him comfortable, prove I was not hurt enough to disrupt the evening. But I did not smile. I did not cause a scene either. I stood still, looked at my father, and said, "Congratulations on 30 years, Dad." Then I walked toward the hallway outside the ballroom. Celeste followed a minute later. She did not speak to me like a rescuer. That mattered. She did not tell me my father was awful or say I should be angry. She simply asked if I had the capacity to consider a new role. Wexford was preparing Harbour House, a historic hotel conversion in the center of Belhaven. The project had suffered from scope gaps, inconsistent vendor information, and a schedule that looked healthy only because no one had connected the right documents. Celeste needed someone who could create a control system without turning every contractor into an enemy. "I remembered your work," she said. "You make people accountable without making them defensive. That is rare." I asked whether she was offering me a job. "I am asking whether you would interview," she said, "and whether you would consider joining the project before the next board meeting. It would be owner's side. You would have no role in vendor selection for any company connected to your family. We would document the conflict immediately." The fact that she said that clearly made my throat tighten. It was the kind of respect my father had always treated as unnecessary, a person naming a boundary before it became a problem. I told her I would think about it. When I returned to the ballroom, Dad had surrounded himself with clients. He looked relieved to see me, as if my absence had threatened his story. What did Celeste want? He asked. A professional conversation, I said. He laughed once. Good. Maybe you can tell her how strong our harbor house proposal is. I looked at him. I cannot discuss that with her, I said. And I would not advocate for your company. That would be a conflict. His face hardened. You are family. You should want to help family. I do, I said. That is why I will not put you or myself in a position that could damage either of us. He leaned closer. Do not turn this into some ethics lecture. You have a chance to be useful. The word landed exactly as he intended. For a moment, I wanted to tell him that I had spent my entire life being useful in ways he refused to name. I wanted to list every proposal I had reviewed, every schedule I had fixed, every late-night call Evan had made when a client needed an answer. I wanted the ballroom to hear it all. Instead, I said, I am already useful. You just do not respect the kind of work I do. Then I left. Outside, the harbor lights moved across the dark water. I sat in my car without turning on the engine. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Please do not make your father's night harder. I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I thought about the way my father had stood in front of a room full of people and treated my career like a joke. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Why was his comfort always my responsibility? I did not accept Wexford's invitation that night. I went home, took off my dress, made tea, and opened the email Celeste had sent after the dinner. It was formal, clear, and respectful. She asked whether I would meet the following week. She described the role, the reporting structure, the conflict of interest procedures, and the project's immediate needs. There was no pressure in the message, only an opportunity. I reread it 3 times. Then I opened a blank document and made 2 columns. In the first, I wrote what I wanted, work that challenged me, professional respect, a chance to lead a complex project, and a life where I did not have to hide my competence so my father could stay comfortable. In the second, I wrote what I was afraid of, that Dad would accuse me of stealing his client, that Evan would say I was trying to punish him, that Mom would ask me to decline the role to preserve peace, and that accepting it would prove my father right about me being disloyal. The second column was longer, but fear has never been the same thing as truth. On Monday, I spoke to my supervisor at Stonebridge. I told her everything, the client relationship, my father's company's interest in Harbor House, the public event, and Celeste's invitation. My supervisor listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You have done exactly what a professional should do. You disclosed the relationship. You did not use it. You did not discuss procurement. You have not done anything wrong." I did not realize how much I needed to hear that until my eyes filled with tears. She also told me that Stonebridge could not place me on Harbor House if I took the role as an outside consultant because of the new reporting relationship. If I accepted it would be a new path, one that required me to resign from the comfortable job I had built. I went to the interview anyway. Celeste and Wexford's chief operating officer asked me questions about vendor controls, occupancy planning, scope management, and how I handled conflict. I answered honestly. I did not mention my father except when the disclosure form required it. 2 days later, they offered me a contract as interim project controls lead for Harbor House. The offer had a clause I appreciated. I would have no authority to score, select, or recommend any vendor with a direct family connection. Another executive would manage those decisions. My work would be to make records visible, timelines realistic, and project commitments traceable. In other words, I would do the work Dad called nothing. I accepted. Then I called my parents. My father did not congratulate me. He said, "So you are going to sit in the client's office and make sure they do not hire us?" "No," I said. "I am going to do my job. Their procurement team will do theirs. You know what this looks like." "Yes," I said quietly. "It looks like I was offered work because I earned it." There was a long silence. My mother got on the phone and said, "Can you please not let this destroy the family?" I closed my eyes. "I am not destroying anything," I told her. "I am setting a boundary between my career and Dad's expectations." It was the first boundary I had ever said out loud. It was also the first one I kept. Harbor House was worse than anyone had admitted. The project had a beautiful concept package, a glossy presentation deck, and a schedule full of confident dates. What it did not have was a complete chain of decisions. Vendor quotes referred to different room counts. The procurement log had outdated insurance certificates. Several change requests had been discussed in meetings, but never converted into written approvals. The opening date had been announced publicly before anyone had confirmed whether the fire safety upgrades could be completed on the proposed timeline. My first week, I did not try to fix everything. I started by asking people what they believed was true. The architect believed the hotel had approved the final finish schedule. The general contractor believed the architect had approved it. Procurement believed the owner had approved it during a site walk. The owner believed the team was still reviewing options. Each group had emails that supported their memory. None of the emails created an actual decision. I built a decision register. I created a single list with the issue, owner, required documents, decision deadline, cost impact, and next action. Then I scheduled short, weekly checkpoints. I told everyone the purpose was not to create more meetings. The purpose was to stop people from discovering problems after they had become expensive. Some vendors resisted. One subcontractor told me he had been building hotels for 25 years and did not need a dashboard to tell him how to do his job. "I am not here to tell you how to build," I said. "I am here to make sure the owner knows what has been approved, what is still missing, and what could change the opening date." By the third week, the contractor began sending the documents I asked for before I had to request them. That is the thing Dad never understood about control systems. They are not about making capable people feel small. They are about making it harder for careless people to hide behind confusion. As part of my disclosure, Wexford's procurement director, Reena Patel, explained that Ellison Commercial Fixtures had submitted a preliminary expression of interest for the millwork package. Because of my family relationship, Reena would handle all contact with the company, and I would not attend any selection meetings. I told her that was exactly right. She nodded. "Your father's company is welcome to compete, but it will compete under the same requirements as everyone else." I had to repeat that sentence to myself later because I knew my father would not hear it that way. The procurement requirements were standard: current insurance, documentation, proof of safety training, a schedule of key materials, references from comparable hospitality work, a detailed scope breakdown, and confirmation that the firm could meet a staged installation plan. None of it was secret. None of it was personal. Still, when Reena sent the invitation, Dad called me within an hour. "You put them up to this," he said. "I did not," I replied. "They want 3 years of safety records. They want staffing plans. They want product traceability. They never asked for this before. This is a new project with a different owner-side process," I said. "I am not involved in the bid." He scoffed. "You hide behind that line like it makes you better than everyone else." I wanted to argue. Instead, I wrote down the date, the time, and what he had said. Not because I wanted to use it against him. Because I had learned that when people revise events later, records protect your memory. Over the next month, I worked late most nights. I reviewed room turnover plans, created a vendor submittal tracker, and helped Wexford identify gaps in the construction schedule. I wrote careful emails. I kept meetings calm. I never mentioned Dad's company unless the conflict process required it. Meanwhile, Evan began sending me messages that started with friendly questions and ended with pressure. Do you know what Wexford really wants here? Can you tell me who we are up against? Dad says you can at least let us know if our number is too high. I did not answer the questions. I replied once, I cannot discuss any procurement details. Please communicate with Rena's team through the official process. Evan sent back a thumbs up emoji. Then he called Mom and told her I was refusing to help the family. The same accusation had followed me my entire life. Whenever I stopped doing work, no one had the right to assign me. But this Jimmy, I had a job description, a signed disclosure, an independent procurement director, and a project record that did not bend around anyone's feelings. This time, I had proof that a boundary was not betrayal. I also began keeping a private decision journal. Not a diary of anger, but a record of what I knew, what I did not know, and how I had handled each potential conflict. I wrote down when I removed myself from a vendor discussion, when I redirected a question to procurement, and when I told my family I could not help. The journal was not proof for anyone else. It was proof for me that I had behaved with care, even when people accused me of betrayal. My family did not ask me directly to break the rules. That would have been too honest. Instead, they made the rules sound unreasonable and my refusal sound personal. My mother called to say Dad had not slept. Evan said the company had invested time in the proposal because Dad believed I would make sure it was treated fairly. My aunt called and asked why I was letting work come between family. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a message that said, I hope you remember who helped you when you were starting out. I read that message twice because I could not decide whether to laugh or cry. My father had given me a desk in the back room and years of criticism. My mother had helped with grocery money once during college. Evan had borrowed my laptop for a semester and returned it with a cracked screen. None of that erased the love I felt for them, but it did not create a debt that required me to compromise my career. Dad started telling a different version of the Harbour House story. In his version, he had introduced me to Wexford. He had built the relationship. I was only there because clients trusted the Ellison name. And now, because I had gotten close to his biggest client, I was shutting him out of an opportunity he had earned. I heard this version at my cousin's birthday dinner. I had not planned to attend, but Mom said the family was tired of tension. So I went, carrying a bakery cake and hoping to sit quietly near the children. Dad was already there, talking to my uncle by the grill. When I walked in, the conversation stopped for just a second. Then Dad smiled. Here she is, he said. The corporate gatekeeper. My uncle looked uncomfortable. Evan stared at the patio stones. I set the cake on the counter and said hello. Dad continued. She has decided that blood is a conflict of interest now. Imagine that. The old version of me would have tried to explain the entire procurement process to a backyard full of people who did not want to understand it. I would have argued facts until I looked defensive. I would have become exactly what Dad expected, the daughter who could not take a joke. Instead, I said, I disclosed a family relationship and followed my employer's rules. The client has an independent procurement team. Dad lifted his hands. See, forms, policies. That is all she talks about, my mother, said Thomas. Please. But she did not tell him to stop. I looked at her, and something in me hurt more than it had when he insulted my work at the Harbor Club. Dad was being himself. Mom was still protecting the version of him that made him easier to live with. I am going home, I said. My aunt followed me to the driveway. She asked whether I could not simply call Wexford and say Dad's company was reliable. I can say what is true, I replied. I cannot influence a process I have been excluded from. And I will not use my family relationship to pressure a client. But he is your father. Yes, I said. And I am his daughter. That should have meant he wanted me to succeed without asking me to risk my integrity for him. At home, I muted the family group chat. For the next week, messages appeared every day. Dad, tell them we can supply all certificates after award. That is normal. Evan, I thought you wanted us to win. Mom, please do not make this worse. I saved every message. Then I sent one response to all three of them. I cannot discuss a Wexford procurement process. I will not communicate on your behalf. Please direct all questions to Reena Patel. I love you, but I will not risk my job or my professional integrity. Dad called immediately. I did not answer. This was not silent treatment. It was a pause. I needed space to remember that his anger did not create an emergency I had to solve. The next morning, I went to work, opened the Harbour House register, and did the part of my job that had nothing to do with my family. I made the project clearer. That was all I had ever wanted to do. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table and wondered whether the easiest path would be to resign from Harbour House. Call Dad and say I had made a mistake. It would have stopped the messages. It might have made my mother sleep. It would have returned me to the role everyone understood, the daughter who moved herself out of the way before anyone had to change. But I had spent too much of my life confusing ease with peace. Ease belonged to the person with the power. Peace had to include me. The Harbour House procurement review was held 6 weeks later in a conference room overlooking Belhaven's old rail station. I was not supposed to attend the vendor selection portion. The conflict plan was clear. My role ended before scoring began. I had prepared the project controls summary, reviewed operational readiness risks, and turned over every vendor document to Reena's team. Then I was scheduled to return for the full project coordination meeting after the procurement decision had been finalized. I almost asked to skip it. I knew Dad would be there. I knew Evan would be there. I knew they would read my presence as proof that I had influence, no matter how carefully the process had been separated. But Celeste told me the coordination meeting concerned the opening sequence, and my role was necessary. So I went. When I entered the conference room, Dad was sitting at the far end of the table beside Evan. He had a leather portfolio in front of him and a look on his face that told me he had practiced an argument. Reena sat near the screen with 2 procurement analysts. Celeste was at the head of the table. The general contractor joined by video. The architect had sent a representative. Everything about the room looked ordinary, which made it feel even more serious. Dad looked at me and said, "I am glad you came. Maybe now we can clear up the confusion." Reena did not look up from her laptop. "Mr. Ellison, Mara will not be participating in procurement discussion. Her conflict disclosure prevents that." Dad's mouth tightened. The meeting began with a status update. I presented the controls register, the remaining decision deadlines, and the opening sequence risks. I spoke only about the work. I did not look at Dad. I did not need to. When I finished, Celeste thanked me and turned to Rena. Please walk us through the millwork package decision and any implementation considerations. Rena clicked to the next slide. For firms submitted complete initial responses, she said. Two were shortlisted after review of hospitality experience, material lead times, insurance documentation, safety records, and phased installation capacity. Ellison Commercial Fixtures was invited to submit but did not meet the documentation threshold. For the shortlist, Dad leaned forward. That is not accurate. We have the experience. We have done hotels for years. Rena nodded. Your experience was considered. The issue was not whether your company has completed hospitality work. The issue was whether the submitted package demonstrated current compliance with the requirements issued for Harbor House. Evan opened his portfolio. We provided references. You provided two references, Rena said. The request required 3 comparable projects and updated insurance certificates. The safety training records were incomplete. The proposed material schedule did not match the phased installation sequence. And the scope narrative did not address the owner's accessibility hardware requirements. Dad looked at me. So this is what you do, he said. You make a list, so long no one can pass it. The room went still. Celeste's expression changed, not into anger, but into something more final. Mr. Ellison, she said, the requirements were not created by Mara. They were created by Wexford's risk, operations, and procurement teams based on the needs of this project. Mara was formally excluded from scoring your submission because of her family connection. Dad opened his mouth, but Celeste continued. She did not recommend against your firm. She did not see your score. She did not decide whether you were shortlisted. What she did do was build the control system that showed us exactly what we needed from every vendor. That system has already prevented multiple project issues. Evan shifted in his chair. We could have sent the missing items after award, Rena answered calmly. We cannot award a package based on documents we hope arrive later. Harbor House is a phased occupancy project. The owner needs evidence before it accepts risk. Dad's voice dropped. We are one of Wexford's longest-standing vendors. Celeste nodded. And that history is why we invited you to submit. But long-standing relationships do not replace current requirements. For a second, I felt almost sorry for him. Not because he had been treated unfairly. He had not. But because I could see the exact moment his old rules stopped working. He had spent his life believing that relationships, charm, and confidence could carry a room farther than systems, records, and accountability. In this room, they could not. Then he turned to me. You could have warned us, he said. I looked at him. I did, I said softly. For years. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Dad stared at me, and I could see him searching for the daughter who would apologize for making him uncomfortable. She was not in the room anymore. The meeting continued. Rena explained that the selected vendor had submitted a complete package and a realistic phased schedule. Celeste asked me to outline how the selected team would be integrated into the controls process. I did my job. I answered questions. I named deadlines. I made sure the transition would be clear. When the meeting ended, Dad gathered his portfolio slowly. Evan stayed seated for a moment, looking at the folders in front of him. Celeste stopped me near the door. Mara, she said, thank you for keeping the process clean. Dad heard her. So did everyone else. Outside the conference room, he caught up with me near the elevator. You embarrassed me, he said. I pressed the call button. No, I said. The requirements Embarrassed you because you treated them like they were beneath you. The elevator opened. I stepped inside before he could answer. For the first time in my life, I did not carry his disappointment home with me. The weeks after the procurement meeting were quieter than I expected. Dad did not call. Evan sent one message asking whether I had won. I did not answer that one either. Mom wrote that she hoped I was happy. I replied that I hoped, eventually, we could speak honestly. At Harbor House, the work continued. The selected millwork vendor started the submittal process. I held the weekly controls meeting. The architect finally closed the finish schedule. The general contractor updated the phased installation plan. People still disagreed, still made mistakes, still missed details. But the project no longer depended on everyone pretending confusion was normal. 3 months later, Wexford offered me a permanent role as Director of Project Controls for the region. The title felt larger than I expected. Not because it sounded important, but because it described work I had already been doing without permission, bringing order to complicated things, protecting people from avoidable surprises, and making sure responsibility had a name. I accepted. My father's company did not collapse. That was never the story. Ellison Commercial Fixtures still had employees, clients, and good work it could do. Dad lost Harbor House because his submission did not meet the published requirements. He could have changed that. He could still change how the company operated. For a while, he did not. Then, for months after the meeting, Evan called me from the back room of the old showroom. Dad hired a compliance consultant, he said. I waited. He says it is temporary, but they are cleaning up the files. Insurance renewals, safety records, proposal templates, all that. I felt something complicated then. Not victory, not relief. Maybe grief for how much pain could have been avoided if Dad had respected this kind of work before it cost him an opportunity. Good, I said. That will help the business. Evan was quiet. Then he said, "You were right about more than I wanted to admit." It was not an apology, but it was the first honest thing he had said since the dinner. My relationship with Mom changed slowly. She began calling without asking me to fix Dad's feelings. She asked about my new office. She sent me photos of flowers in her garden. One day, she said, "I should have stopped him when he made you small." I was driving when she said it. I pulled into a parking lot and sat there with both hands on the wheel. "Why didn't you?" I asked. Her voice broke. Because I thought keeping peace was the same as protecting everyone. I did not know what to say. So I said the truth. It protected him. It did not protect me. She started crying. I did not rush to soothe her. I let the silence exist. That was new for both of us. Dad did not apologize directly for a long time. The first change came in a small envelope. It arrived at my apartment after Thanksgiving. Inside was a photocopy of a new company policy, vendor qualification requirements, updated safety documentation, current insurance verification, and a schedule review process before proposals went out. Archie the Bouton Dad had written his Ivan Hundring. Thought you would appreciate this. I stared at the page for a long time. It was not enough to erase the past, but it was evidence that the work he had called nothing had finally become visible to him. I put the paper in my desk, drawer beside Celeste's old email. Not because I needed Dad's approval. Because I wanted to remember that change sometimes arrives after the truth has already done its work. A year after Harbor House opened, I visited the hotel on a quiet, weekday morning. The lobby had warm wood panels, wide accessible paths, and a front desk designed so guests could approach without feeling rushed. None of the people checking in knew my name. That was fini than work. Families moving through difficult weeks had a place that made a little more sense because someone had insisted the small details were real. I stood there for a moment and felt proud without needing anyone in my family to approve it. My father called my job nothing because he could not measure it with the tools he trusted. He understood sales. He understood handshakes, contracts signed across a table, a finished lobby, and a client who shook his hand in public. He did not understand the invisible work that made those moments possible. The documented decision, the current certificate, the honest schedule, the person willing to ask what everyone else hoped would not matter. For years, I tried to translate my work into a language he would respect. I made it smaller. I called it paperwork. I laughed when he laughed. I accepted the version of me that made him feel bigger. But being understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you is not a fair goal. The quiet revenge in this family conflict story was never getting my father's biggest client to choose me over him. I did not take his business. I did not sabotage his bid. I did not need to humiliate him in front of a room full of people. I simply stopped protecting the story that I was nothing. The client saw my work. The records showed the truth. The process stayed clean. And when my father tried to turn his disappointment into my responsibility, I let it belong to him. That is what a boundary can look like. Not a slammed door, not a cruel speech, a calm sentence, a clair who, a decision to keep your integrity, even when someone you love asks you to trade it for peace. I still love my family. Love did not disappear when I stopped accepting disrespect. But love changed shape. It became something that required honesty, not performance. It became something that could not be measured by how quietly I accepted being reduced. If you have ever had a parent, sibling, partner, or boss dismiss the work that keeps everything together, remember this: you do not need their permission to take your own contributions seriously. Sometimes the person who calls your work nothing is only revealing how little they understand the structure holding them up. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family and then recognized by someone who actually saw your work? What would you have done in that conference room? Share your answer in the comments. And subscribe for more family conflict stories, revenge stories, and calm drama stories about quiet strength, hard boundaries, and the truth that does not need to shout to be heard.